We will continue our session. Señor Spearheller.
Good afternoon, Mr. Spearheller. Good afternoon. I'm going to ask you to read the statement that you have before you. It's a witness statement. You have a statement before you. Please read it. It's on the table. I solemnly declare on my honor and conscience that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Stan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Spieler. How are you doing?
Muy bien, gracias.
Very well, thank you.
Do you have in front of you a copy of the statement you have submitted in this arbitration on behalf of Generadora del Sur S.A. and Planos y Puntos dated March 14th, 2011?
Yes, it's right in front of me.
And Generadora del Sur is also often referred to as GASUR, correct?
That is correct. It is known as Jesur also.
Do you ratify that statement and affirm its truthfulness before the tribunal?
Sí, la ratifico completamente.
Yes, I fully ratify its contents.
Paragraphs 1 and 3 of your March 14th, 2011 statement, you reference and ratify the first statement that was rendered in this arbitration on behalf of Jesur and Planos y Puntos dated June 17th, 2009, correct?
That is correct. It's also right here.
Okay, so do you have a copy? You have a copy of that statement in front of you?
Tiene una.
Es afirmativo.
Yes, I have a copy right before me.
I'd like to say at this point, and I apologize for interrupting this direct, but we have some serious questions about one witness ratifying another witness's statement, particularly when the other statement was really a statement of two witnesses. And we'll explore that on cross-examination, but I just didn't want to let it pass unnoticed at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spieler, do you ratify the statement of June 17th, 2009 and affirm its truthfulness before the tribunal?
Yes, I do, and I fully corroborate it.
Mr. Spieler, what types of businesses do GASUR and Planos y Puntos engage in?
Jesur and Planos y Puntos are companies that develop electricity programs for generation and distribution of electricity in the Republic of Guatemala.
In paragraph 3 of your statement, you describe a preliminary electricity transmission easement agreement that Jesur had with Ferrovías, which Jesur backed out of because of the declaration of lesividad. Could you please explain what were the terms of this preliminary agreement?
There are different tranches of railway, and we have a contract with Ferrovia for its use. And usufruct, we put up posts, and we have electricity power lines that is currently operating. We had 5 contracts that we had for 52 kilometers of railway.
Okay. Now, could you describe the preliminary agreement that you reference in paragraph 3 of your statement that you backed out of because of the declaration of lesividad? What were the terms of that agreement?
Es correcto.
That's correct. after the government declared lesividad of the contract that it had with Ferrovías, both GESUR and Planos y Puntos, well, we had an agreement to extend our usufruct contract for the railway for another 32 kilometers. This contract that we had was cancelled because of the declaration of lesividad and in connection with the agreement that we initially had with Ferrovías.
Terms of that preliminary agreement that you backed out of with Ferrovías. What was the price that you had negotiated?
This was an agreement, and initially it was going to be at a price of $1,000 per kilometer, and during the life of the contract it was going to be on average $3,200 per kilometer of each line that we had under the usufruct contract.
Refused to conclude this further easement agreement after the declaration of lesividad.
In order to try and continue with this line, we needed to have the legal certainty that Ferrovías was going to continue using the train and the railway, because what we needed for placing the posts and the power lines, well, that entailed a very high price, and at that time we didn't want to run the risk until such time as we knew the conditions that Ferrovías was going to be operating in Guatemala, and if it was going to be still operating in Guatemala.
And why was your company concerned about whether Ferrovías was going to still be operating in Guatemala?
Basically because we already have 52 kilometers and we are using the line there. We have customers and users there, electricity users, and they are expecting us to continue providing them with service. If this agreement between Ferrovías and the gobierno was no longer valid, we would have had a problem, and we would no longer be able to provide power for our clients.
Declaration of the lesividad, would GESUR have gone forward with its preliminary easement agreement with Ferrovías?
That is correct. If this declaration of the lesividad had not existed, both Planos y Puntos and GESUR would have gone on with the construction of lines south to the city of Escuintla. That was the project that we had in mind.
Is GESUR still paying Ferrovías for the easement agreements it entered into prior to the declaration of lesividad?
That is correct. Both GESUR and Planos y Puntos continued performing under the contracts that they had entered into, because we felt that the risk of not performing under our contracts would have been much larger if we had stopped payment. We felt that since we're still paying under these contracts, we're going to have the possibility of continue to use the line.
Now, Guatemala's counsel at the beginning of your testimony referenced that they have some issues or some questions about the circumstances which led you to executing your statement when the first statement on behalf of your company was executed by two other individuals. Could you explain the circumstances which led to you executing the second statement instead of the two individuals who executed the first statement on behalf of your companies?
Sí,
Yes, the people that had signed this first statement are individuals who are still working there for the organization. These are individuals that were not at the time able to come here and ratify this, and that is why I am doing that on their behalf fully.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. de Bovois?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Spiegler, my name is Whitney Debevoise, and I'm here on behalf of the Republic of Guatemala, and I'll be asking you some questions about your statement and the questions that you've just had from counsel for the claimants. I'll be asking you these questions in English, and there will be a simultaneous translation for you into Spanish. Mr. Spiegler, looking at your statement, the one that you signed, could you point me to a place where you identify who your employer is?
sí, en la parte de la...
Yes, if you go to the statement and you go to point 2, I am saying that I am testifying on behalf of Generadora del Sur and of Planos y Puntos. These are the institutions that have given me express authorization to appear on their behalf in these proceedings.
From whom do you receive your paycheck?
I work for a company that is now called Generadora del Este S.A. It is a part of this group that is also made up of GESUR and Planos y Puntos.
Could you please explain the relationship between Planos y Puntos and your current employer?
Planos
Planos y Puntos is a company that mainly deals in realty, and it is the owner of the land that holds the power plant for Generadora del Este, and it also holds Generadora del Sur. It is a real estate company that is the owner of the land in which these facilities are located.
Referred to Generadora del Sur, or GESUR, and what is the relationship between that company and your employer?
Generadora del Sur is a company that, apart from generating electricity, also distributes electricity, and our clients receive electricity from Generadora del Sur. It is the company, which is a company that also puts up posts and transmission and distribution lines.
You mentioned a company whose name has not appeared in these proceedings before as your current employer. Could you tell us again the name of that company, the company from which you get your paycheck?
The name is Generadora del Este, Sociedad Anónima. It is a company that together with these other companies is a part of a group dedicated to the generation, transmission, and distribution of electrical power.
Prized only of the three companies we have talked about so far?
No, there are other companies that are also members of the group. Those companies are not mentioned here. They're not my direct employer. Generadora del Este is my direct employer, so I felt that it wasn't worth it to mention them.
On whose behalf you are speaking here today, and I think it's relevant to know the full reach of the group with which you are associated. So could you please answer the question?
Yes. Basically, this group is made up of different companies that have hotels, real estate developments, and other kinds of companies that are not necessarily related to the power generation sector. I can talk about the section that refers directly to the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. That is my field. That is correct. There is a textile company in this group.
Company.
The name of the company is Industrias Textiles del Lago S.A.
Company that generates electricity, that employs you?
Each of the companies has a board of directors, and I wouldn't be able to assure that Industrias Textiles del Lago is the owner of Generadora del Este. These are companies that belong to a group of investors who are the owners of a number of companies. Industrias Textiles del Lago is not necessarily the owner of Generadora del Este.
How many electricity generating plants are there in this group?
Básicamente existe una localidad en
Basically, there is a location where there are 120 megawatts of power that is being generated by different power plants in one single location.
Near the textile factory?
I don't object to this line of questioning. I'm not sure what the relevance is of textile factories and what power plants do and their locations and all these other matters have to do with who he's testifying for in this proceeding. It seems like a fishing expedition. It has nothing to do with his testimony.
Mr. Stern, this is not a fishing expedition. I happen to know some facts, and I think if the witness will cooperate, we'll bring them out quickly, and you'll see the relevance.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The electricity generating facilities, did these begin as cogeneration facilities for the textile plant?
existe un lugar que se llama Parques del Lago, que es un
There's a place called Parques del Lago. It is an industrial complex, and apart from textile plants, they have maquiladoras and also power generation plants. This is an industrial complex, and all these elements are incorporated into it. You talked about co-generator. That denomination is no longer used for these generation plants. We just call them generators. A co-generator is a company generating power for itself and selling the remains of the power to the network or to other users. In the case of Generadora del Este, it sells power directly to the electrical line and also to users that are connected to it by their own lines.
Sur, because you're purporting to speak today on behalf of Jesur. not Generadora del Este, your actual employer.
Es correcto.
That is correct. Generador del Sur is the company that at the time installed the power distribution system privately for the plants in the Parque del Lago area. Generador del Sur transfers and distributes electricity from its generation plants.
Generadora del Sur generates more electricity than can be used by that park and that plant. So it has electricity left over, which it sells to other customers, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct.
This electricity is not sold through the main Guatemalan grid, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct.
Now, let's talk about your statement in which you said that you have been expressly authorized to appear on their behalf in these proceedings, referring to Jesur and Planos y Puntos. Who authorized you to appear?
Basically, the individuals who are directors of Planos y Puntos and Generadora del Sur, they are the ones who authorized me to appear here because I'm one of the people who has the most experience, has the longest experience in this line of work. I know the history of the transmission lines in the area that we're working in.
And I believe you testified in response to a question from Mr. Stern that you provided a second affidavit because the two gentlemen who provided the first written statement were not available to come here today and testify. Is that correct?
Sí, es correcto.
Yes, that is correct.
I'd ask you to take a look at the statement that you did sign at the second page near your signature. Would you please read for me the date right before your signature?
Catorce de marzo.
March 14th, 2011.
Your appearance with this written statement has nothing to do with whether the two gentlemen who signed the first statement could be here today or not, because you signed this statement 8 months ago, correct?
Yes, at this point I cannot answer why they're not here, but I am confirming my statement and also their statements.
Their statement for a minute. The statement was signed by Mr. Rolando Paredes Sarmiento on one hand and by Mr. Edgar Alfredo Ordóñez on the other hand, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct.
Who is Mr. Edgar Alfredo Ordóñez?
El señor Edgar Alfredo
Mr. Edgar Alfredo Ordóñez is an executive who works for the Jesur Generation Company and Planos and Puntos. He's an administrator.
Manager, what kind of a manager?
En el párrafo,
Here it clearly states that Edgar Alfredo Ordóñez is the only manager and legal representative for Planos en Puntos Sociedad Anónima.
What does that really mean, Mr. Spiegler? Is he the gentleman who commands the company, who runs the company and makes all the decisions?
el administrador, como su nombre,
The manager is the person who represents the interests of the owner, and the person also has to conduct work that has to do with the administration, with the management of the premises that are part of Plano en Punto.
What about Mr. Rolando Paredes Sarmiento? What is his position at Jesur?
Along the same lines, there is a paragraph that says that this person, Rolando Sarmiento, is the only manager of this generation company for the South.
Real responsibilities are.
de ellos, básicamente,
Their responsibilities as managers, they are the ones who need to monitor the assets of the company.
Ability for that. Does he also make all the decisions about how to do that?
esta es una decisión
This is a decision made jointly, not only by them, but also by the owners and the people who work with them.
Who makes the decisions in the company?
Cuando usted indica que no es la persona
When you're saying that this is not the person who makes decisions in the company, I don't know what you're referring to, because I don't know whether these are decisions to hire staff or to buy other shares or what to do. So you are referring to this in a very general way, and you are not referring to what you mean by saying the one making the decisions.
Easements for electric wires. Would he alone make a decision about whether to enter into a contract for an easement for electricity transmission?
Basically, as part of the mandate of the sole manager, there is the obligation of signing contracts entered into to distribute power. So this person is responsible for signing the contract.
Who signs the contract? But who makes the decision to enter into the contract?
The decision to sign a contract or not, or the decision to make to decide something of this nature, is related to the responsibility of the owners of the company, or in conjunction with the engineers and the people who are in charge of making sure where the power has to be conveyed. Whenever there is a request by users to have electric services, the different paths to get to that goal are analyzed and the contracts are entered so as to provide coverage to the client. This is not only the decision by the owners or the managers, rather, this is a decision made jointly by all the staff working for a company.
To cancel a contract.
That is correct. When a decision is made about the inadequacy of a contract, for example, because there is no longer a user or a client, it is not proper to continue to have the electric power service, so therefore a joint decision is made to render a contract null.
Mr. Spiegler, you're not the administrator of HESUR, correct?
No,
The administrator of Planos y Puntos, correct?
correct, I'm not.
So in what capacity did you sign the statement that you signed?
The statement I signed was signed as manager in charge of power generation, but also of power distribution to our users. That is to say, the person in charge of managing contracts, that would be me.
Boss?
Sí.
Yes,
Are you Mr. Sarmiento's boss?
correct.
Mr. Spiegler, you said that in your statement that you're ratifying the other statement of your two inferior employees in the group, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct.
If I direct you to paragraph 2 of your statement, the one that you signed, you said that they were based on your personal knowledge.
Correcto.
Correct.
And the two gentlemen who signed the other statement said that their statement was based on their personal knowledge, correct?
Así.
That's correct.
So how can your personal knowledge ratify their personal knowledge?
Como le indicaba anteriormente,
As I mentioned before, when a statement of this sort is made, this is beyond one person. There are several persons making a statement now to determine whether this is appropriate or not for the investment group. In this case, if we have users that need to be provided a service, electric power service, and as manager, I need to guarantee that that service continues to be provided to the users. Therefore, I need to be aware of all the factors that may impact on the feasibility of continuing to offer services to our users.
Know whether you want this to count against my cross-examination time or whether we should take this up later. But I think that we've established on the record that Mr. Spiegler gave a statement in his name, but that he really should not be incorporating a statement of two other gentlemen who are not here and who manifestly were just changed because that was convenient. I don't believe that this is an appropriate type of proof to have in a proceeding like this.
With all,
Mr. Stern.
with all due respect, this is nonsense. He has personal knowledge. The people that worked underneath him, his inferior employees, have personal knowledge of the same facts. They know the same thing, and that's what he's testified to. This has nothing to do with him lacking personal knowledge of the same facts that his inferior employees have knowledge of.
I think on behalf of the tribunal, you should continue with your cross-examination, and we will make, as in respect of all evidence submitted, we will make our own judgment about it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Spiegler, I believe that in your statement you indicated that there was a preliminary agreement between JESUR and Ferrovías for a new easement. Is that correct?
Es correcto.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Are the characteristics of a preliminary agreement? Is this an agreement between gentlemen? Unwritten?
Normalmente considero que todo lo
I usually think that agreements have to be drawn among gentlemen, but when there is a preliminary agreement, it is based on the distance, since this is an easement, the distance to be established and also the value, the duration of the contract, as well as the final price or the average price for this contract. This is a preliminary agreement, and the reasons why the contract is to be extended are specified. Let me remind you that so far we have 5 contracts with them, and this would have been the 6th one to be signed between Planos, Puntos, JESUR, and Ferrovías had there been no lesividad declaration by the government.
But you stated in your statement that this agreement would have been negotiated. That means that the agreement had not yet been negotiated, correct?
el arreglo sí se había.
The arrangement was negotiated in terms of distance, in terms of price, but after the lesividad declaration, it was not possible to sign the contract because it was a financial risk, a significant risk for Planos y Puntos as well as for JESUR. It was risky to sign a new contract on something that is being discussed and whether the concession is going to continue or not. Likewise, the contracts that we currently have entail the same concern, that is to say whether this is going to be valid or not in the upcoming years, since our users are hoping that the contracts we entered into with them are going to be continued and they will continue to be valid while they require our services.
Your existing contracts are 50-year contracts, correct?
No tengo en este.
I don't have here the term for each of the contracts, but they are about 50 years.
The so-called preliminary agreement, was there an agreement on the term for that contract?
Yes. The term of the contracts that we had signed, the previous ones and the one that we were thinking of signing, could not last longer than the easement contract that Ferrovias had. That is to say, they were going to conclude at the same time.
You said that the reason that the company did not proceed with this preliminary agreement was because of legal uncertainty about the continuation of the rights of Ferrovias. You also said that there was a question about the continuing rights of Ferrovias with respect to your existing contracts, correct?
Before the lesividad declaration by the government of Oscar Berger for the contract with Ferrovias, we had the utmost certainty and guarantees that the contract that we had signed with them was going to be fully valid during the concession period. But when the time came to have a new agreement, if there was no legal certainty that the contracts were going to be fulfilled, we were unable to start a new contract since we had some doubts as to the continuation of the contract.
Old contracts, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct. Planos y Puntos and Jesur always fulfill their contracts, and that's the reason why we considered that it was better to continue with the payments as agreed consistently rather than suspend payment, because the risk was lower by paying than failing to pay and then have other problems in the future.
People to whom it sells electricity, correct?
Just, Mr. de Beauvois, just simply
Sí.
an administrative matter. Please pause because of the interpretation.
Yeah, well, if the witness would just answer my question and not give a speech, that would be easier. You have clients, customers, to whom you sell electricity, correct? At Jesur.
Es correcto.
That is correct. Those are clients and customers that are from the private sector, and they are part of the easement.
Does Jesur have a license to sell that electricity?
I'm going to object to the relevance of
Mr. President, I think he has testified to his concern about the legal insecurity of proceeding with a relationship with Ferrovias. I think there could be a reciprocal side of that insecurity. If they are not authorized to sell electricity, they might be thrown out of their business as an electricity distributor, and Ferrovias would lose the income from those easements. So I think this is entirely fair game. The question of legal security has been raised by them.
I'm sorry, did you overrule the objection? I don't know how the issue of whether Jesur has a license to sell electricity to whomever has anything to do with whether their decision to continue or enter into an additional agreement with Ferrovias or to continue to pay rent under existing agreements. I don't see the connection or the relevance whatsoever.
The objection is sustained.
Mr. Spiegler, you indicated that Jesur does not sell electricity into the grid, but that the other company, that's your current employer, does sell electricity into the grid. Correct?
No, yo no.
No, I did not mention whether they sold to the grid or not. I basically indicated that HESUR as such has individual clients throughout the railway line, and that's the reason why we are working on that.
And is the reason that they don't sell into the grid because they're not authorized to do so?
Again, same objection that the tribunal sustained. There's no relevance whatsoever. He's talking about, this has nothing to do with the issues before the tribunal.
I don't know how Ferrovias can understand that they're going to continue to receive rents for an easement for 50 years from a company that's not licensed to provide electricity.
Well, they have a contract, first of all, and again, this is trying to smear GASUR and by extension smearing Ferrovias.
The witnesses stated that legal security was their concern. Legal security can work both ways.
I didn't know I was engaging in a colloquy with Guatemala's counsel. Again, I object to the relevance of this question.
Basically, we sustained the objection as we had sustained the previous one, and if you could move on.
All right. Well, Mr. Spiegler, why don't we talk about your personal involvement in the negotiation of this preliminary agreement? How many meetings did you attend in connection with the negotiation of this agreement?
This preliminary agreement, as well as the previous agreements, were carried out with Mr. Sen, as well as Mr. Juan Pablo Carrasco at one point, to be able to indicate the requirements we were going to have in terms of easement for the remaining 32 kilometers. And clearly we had several meetings to be able to continue with the expansion of our easement requirement.
For this a deal?
There is an agreement with them, but the contract was not signed because of lesividad. The contract is drafted, and until all the legal conditions are there, but a preliminary agreement is something that addresses the relevant issues, and later on these issues are reflected in a contract when it is finally decided that it is feasible.
Mr. Spiegler, I'd like to refer you to document oh, I'm sorry, that's the other witness. Okay. To document, well, we'll wait, we'll lay a predicate for that. How did you learn about the Lesivo Declaration?
La declaración de lesividad fue
The lesividad declaration was basically something very public in Guatemala. It became known through statements in the press, of the radio, and before we learned about this publicly, we had talked to Ferrovias, and initially they had given us the certainty that we would be able to continue as we have continued so far with our contracts, but that they were concerned because they did not know whether they were going to have some continuity in their dealings with the government.
tell you that their legal rights under their concession were still in force, notwithstanding the lesivo?
Es decir,
They mentioned to us that as long as the possibility to reach an agreement with the government was still valid, we could continue with our contracts as we have done so far.
Were you aware that with the declaration of lesivo, they didn't lose their legal right to the concession?
la declaración de lesividad
The lesividad declaration in a country such as Guatemala is very concerning because it means that a government at that point in time may have the desire to terminate a specific concession. That is to say, it is something that cannot be taken lightly, but it is quite concerning, in particular, if part of our business is a contract that we have with Ferrovias. Therefore, we were also very concerned, and we continue to be concerned to date, in the sense that the government could make a unilateral decision to terminate these contracts.
In Jesur with Ferrovias, these are in what we refer to in this proceeding as Phase 2, the southern line. Southwest of Guatemala City, correct? Tordiscuitla.
es correcto.
That is correct.
Declaration of lesivo was with respect to a concession for rolling stock for railway cars and engines, correct?
La
The lesividad declaration that prevents a company from continuing their business is the beginning of the end of a global contract. It is not just a small portion of what was declared lesivo, but since they cannot operate, there are some other problems, and we have already experienced them, and it has to do with the squatters along the lines, along the railway lines, since the train is no longer operating.
Your statement that Jesur and Planos y Puntos had invested more than $10 million in the easement, is that correct?
Lo que se ha
What was invested for that amount that you've indicated refers to the line for transmission, distribution, and substations that are installed along the railway line. That's the amount that's been spent thus far, not only on the line, but on all the equipment required for being able to distribute to the users.
259, please. And would you please confirm for me that this document is dated June 10, 2003, Guatemala City. It's addressed to Mr. Sarceño, the overseer of FEGUA. Is that correct?
Es correcto. También
That is correct, and I can also ratify for you that this is the first time I'm looking at this document. I don't know what it's about, and I don't know what its relevance is.
And this is coming from Mr. Miguel Angel Samayoa, Chief Engineering Planning and Projects Department at FEGUA. Correct?
ok, así aparece acá en esta.
Okay, yes, that's how it appears here.
3, please. You'll see a photograph there of the right-of-way of Ferrovias's concession between Palin and Escuintla, the area where you had your easement. And you'll see that the poles are right in the middle of the right-of-way, correct?
I'm going to object. The witness says he's never seen this document. He's not an author of the document. He's asking him to authenticate and agree to photographs that he didn't take or have any involvement in.
Well, he can certainly say whether these poles are in the middle of the easement. The photograph is right there.
Well, then I object to the relevance of the question.
The relevance will become quite obvious with my next question.
Well, then I would request that he get to the relevance.
Mr. Spiegler?
Mr. de Beauvois, why don't you explain to the witness what
Yes.
exactly the document
Yes.
is, and then ask both questions at the same time? One after the other.
Mr. Spiegler, this report, as you can read here, is a report to the overseer of FEGWA from the chief engineer reporting on encroachments on the right-of-way. And it shows photographs taken during a survey of the right-of-way, including electric poles and wires in the right-of-way. Now, you said that your company had invested $10 million, not all of it in poles, but a considerable sum of money. And if the poles are in the middle of the right-of-way, how will you have any security if Ferrovias constructs a railroad? You're going to have to move those poles, won't you?
Objection, no foundation.
The photographs are there for everyone to see.
No foundation to connect any of this evidence to this witness or knowledge of this witness.
I believe we're talking about the investment that has been made and would be wasted if Ferrovias were to comply with its contract.
Again, there's no foundation for this document to ask the witness questions about this. None.
Wasn't this? Okay. Was it? Where was it referred to in the briefs? It was referred to in the brief, right?
We will dismiss the objection, and you may go ahead.
So, Mr. Spiegler, the question then is, if Ferrovias decided to construct Phase 2 under their concession, Jesur would need to move any poles that were in the right-of-way, correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct. If at a given point in time there's a post such as that you're indicating there, that's in the middle of the right-of-way, and it needs to be moved in order to have the way cleared. Once the squatter settlements, which you can see right there, are no longer there, at that time, Jesur would have no problem whatsoever moving any type of post, which at a given point in time might need to be moved in order to leave a clear passageway for the train.
Cost your company a lot of money, correct?
Lo que hayan
What needs to be done to guarantee that Ferrovias will continue using the rail line, well, we have no difficulty whatsoever doing what needs to be done because it's figures in our contracts that once Ferrovias requires the moving of some post, or to make sure it's not in the way, there's no problem doing that.
Aware that there is a pending court proceeding in which a judge is determining whether the declaration of lesivo was properly issued? Yes or no? Are you aware?
No, I'm not aware of it.
Are you aware that the court can find that the lesivo declaration should not have been issued? Yes or no?
No, I'm not aware of that. Under Guatemalan law, the court can overturn the declaration of lesivo. If that were to happen, would there be any threat at that point to your easements?
Por eso estoy acá.
That's why I'm here, because at this time there could eventually be some kind of problem with the declaration of lesividad that would impair our interests. As you yourself are showing in the photos, we are using the right of way, which we have, which has been recognized with Ferrovías for the use and usufruct of this part of the transmission line. So we are concerned that, in effect, this could come to pass.
You're also concerned about your existing easement.
Es correcto.
That's correct. What concerns us most at this time is the existing easement. Logically, for that very reason, and it's because of the uncertainty, we were unable to enter into the contract for expansion of the line.
Of Ferrovías, would you resume negotiations?
I would answer in the affirmative, immediately.
I think in your statement you indicated that you learned about this declaration of lesivo in the press. Is that correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct. We had just recently signed the last contract that we have with Ferrovías, and if you look at the documents, it's from the same year, 2006, as the Declaration of Lesividad. For that very reason, we are very much looking at any situation that might affect the interest that we had to this right-of-way.
That what you heard in the press indicated to you that the government was against Ferrovías, and you attributed that to statements from people in the government. Is that correct?
Es correcto.
That is correct, beginning with the President of the Republic, who was the first one who came out publicly to make such indications to both the written and broadcast media.
I'd like to show you a little video and see if you ever saw this video.
La empresa Ferrovías de Guatemala repostó hoy la decisión del organismo ejecutivo que declaró lesivo el contrato de concesión de los ferrocarriles de Guatemala. Después de 8 años, según los concesionarios, es el Estado el que no ha cumplido u honrado sus compromisos contractuales.
El incumplimiento durante 8 años de estos compromisos por parte del Estado obligó a la entidad Ferrovías a recurrir al arbitraje para solicitarle por esta vía al Estado cumplimiento de estos acuerdos. El Estado a la fecha no ha querido reconocer ni aceptar la cláusula arbitral que se establecen en los contratos y ha hecho caso omiso del compromiso arbitral que existe dentro de los contratos. El acuerdo arbitral es un pacto que no puede ser sujeto a opinión o a elementos subjetivos. Es un pacto contractual que es vinculante para las
For the record, by the way, that's Exhibit C-132. Did you recognize any of the people in that video, Mr. Spiegler?
¿Es correcto?
Yes. Mr. Juan Pablo Carrasco, who is here in the room, appears there, and also Mr. Henry Posner and Jorge Sen.
Did you recognize the backdrop in that video? What was written on the wall behind the people who were speaking?
No, I didn't notice that.
Well, we can put it back up if you like, but I think it's clear to all that it said Ferrovías. So this was a press conference that was being conducted at some premise where they wanted the press to know that it was Ferrovías. It's his press conference. Does that look right in the frame you're seeing now?
Correcto.
Correct. I can see that it says Ferrovías behind him.
Get into newspapers and radio and TV unless someone puts it there, someone releases it, correct?
No le podría asegurar.
I can't say for sure.
Mr. Du Bois, your time is up.
How much do you have?
And
I think our time calculator gave me 8 more minutes, but I apologize if... Yes, the question.
I should say, as a matter of administration of the proceedings, that we are counting the time. While if the tribunal would interrupt and ask questions, we are not counting this time as the party's time. Nonetheless, we count any incident during the cross-examination in which there are objections or the tribunal has to decide as part of the cross-examination. So that may be the reason. But if you have one question more, also, as I said, we have to sort of stop just shortly before 5, and I would like, if the tribunal has any question, or the other party, for redirect.
Thank you, Mr. President, for clarifying.
Thank you. Do you have any, please?
Mr. Spiegler, do you have personal knowledge of all the facts contained in your statement?
En los que yo declaré, sí.
Where I made a statement, yes.
And do you have personal knowledge of all the facts contained in the first statement that was rendered by Mr. Ordóñez and Mr. Paredes?
Es correcto, también tengo.
That is correct. I also have such knowledge.
And were you personally involved in the facts that are stated in both of these statements?
Es correcto.
That is correct. In the affirmative.
That would include the decision of your companies not to go forward with the preliminary agreement with Ferrovías, which is described in both of the statements?
Se tomó.
It was decided not to continue until there were legal certainty that, in effect, it would be possible to continue with the already existing contracts and with a new contract.
And you have personal knowledge of that decision. You were involved in that, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you.
we saw a video of the Ferrovias press conference, and I believe that there was also a press release. Did you first learn of the CIVO declaration from this press conference and from the press release from Ferrovias?
No.
No, I had already learned of it prior to this press release at the time when the Declaration of Lesividad was made. The President of the Republic, Oscar Berger, well, when he made that declaration, that's when we found out about it. This video came long after the date of Declaration of Lesividad by the President.
This declaration publicized by the media at the time?
Es correcto.
That is correct. It was widely publicized.
Mr. Debevoise asked about the different contracts. Were you aware that under two of these deeds, 143 and 158, that Ferrovias continued to have the right to operate the railway, notwithstanding the declaration?
Nuestro último.
Our last contract is dated August 2006, and it was entered into before the Declaration of Lesividad of the contracts. In other words, the contracts that we have signed were before this was declared by the President.
Ferrovias, when you indicated that you were not going to proceed with this next contract, try to dissuade you and tell you that they still maintain the right to the equipment and under Deed 402 could legally have continued to operate?
Sí, pero.
Yes, but not so much with respect to the equipment, because the equipment isn't all that important for us, but rather the right of way for the train, along the train line. In other words, what's of interest for us is to be able to continue with the territorial concession, which is where our line runs. The difficulty, once one no longer has the equipment, is that operations are suspended, and this entails people beginning to invade the land, squatters. So the one thing brings along the other. So once the train no longer runs, then people invade the lands, and this stands in the way of us maintaining our transmission and distribution lines. That is the problem subsequent to this declaration.
Trains would no longer run.
With the declaration of lesividad by the President, logically, the company, Ferrovias as such, did not continue operating its trains, and therefore this led people to begin to invade places where they'd not done so before. And this is prejudicial to us as regards maintaining the lines.
Any questions, Mr. Stern, on the questions of Mr. Eisenstadt?
No, nothing further.
Mr. Debevoise.
Mr. Spiegler, you were asked again by Mr. Eisenstadt about how you learned about the Lesivo Declaration. Did you read the official Gazette when this came out?
Es decir, antes de.
That is to say, before it came out in the official Gazette, it was already publicly known that President Oscar Berger was against this concession. Subsequently, since it was a very important matter for us, we were paying close attention to any matter that might be related to the easements we had, and anything that might affect Ferrovías would indirectly affect us as well.
Very good. Thank you. ¿Cómo pronuncia su nombre?
How do you pronounce your name? Do you say Spiegler or Spiegeler?
Alemán y en alemán se dice Spiegeler. Hay una revista que se llama Der Spiegel, no sé si conoce.
Sí.
¿Va?
Pues señor Spiegel, muchísimas gracias por su testimonio. Se puede.
Mr. Spiegel, thank you very much for your testimony. You may stand down. Thank you. Very kind of you.
As I said at the beginning of the session, that we would adjourn shortly before 5, and this sort of right on the spot. And we will reconvene on Sunday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, from a session from 2 to 6. So thank you so much, and enjoy the break.